Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 33 team selection as we look ahead towards the final game week before the big double in 34. And of course, the major news that we got this week was the announcement of Game Week 37 and the doubles there. But to be honest, I think we all expected them to fall exactly as they did. If you've been following, for example, Ben Krellin's planner, you'll know exactly why we think that, and obviously any of the videos that we've been posting recently. Now, of course, with my team selection and my plans, the plan really for Game Week 34 is to have a strong enough team, I think, to compete with the field, knowing, of course, that versus a free hit versus people who are dead ending in Game Week 34 and then wildcarding on 35, then I'm probably going to have a weaker team. But that's something that I'm comfortable with having, ultimately, knowing that at least I've got my Liverpool attackers in place, my Arsenal players in place too, and comfortable with only having Solanke, for example, and then we'll probably move into a doubler in 34. So that's just the context in terms of the doubles and so on and so forth. Obviously, the plan is to bench boost on 37. If we quickly review Game Week 32, which was a bit of an unfortunate week in the sense that we definitely got our sort of benching calls wrong. We benched Saka so that we could punt on both Muniz and Luis Diaz. And as it turns out, of course, Saka, within roughly basically 63 minutes of football, destroyed us, and he got 10 points. Muniz blanked. Luis Diaz still scored, of course, but then didn't get into the bonus points whatsoever. Arsenal, of course, also kept their clean sheet, so that was another boost for Saka. And that's it, right? You take those L's, we move on. We wanted to take the risk in the sense knowing that around a lot of people in the top 10K have 95% of Saka, and that's a good chance for me, where I think Muniz having a home fixture like Newcastle at home, Luis Diaz having such a great fixture like United, given the form that United are in, and also that the state of the defense right now, just wanted to take that chance. It didn't pay off. We move on. But this week, we probably won't be doing the same thing. With the rest of the team, we had a couple of developments. Guardiola getting a yellow card and a substitution because he felt a little bit of pain in his groin, and him turning up to the Bernabeu and absolutely scoring a screamer with his right foot was a surprise for me as a Real Madrid fan. Not something I particularly liked, but there you have it. As far as Gusto, we were very fortunate with the auto sub. We talked about that in the transfer plans video. Probably not going to side against the Arsenal defense as much as I can, really, for the rest of the season, to be honest. And that's pretty much the state of play. Couple duds in the sense that Son and Palmer, the captaincy, I don't think went as well as some people would have thought. Salah and Holland also did well, just about what we expected, really, but nothing to separate those captaincies, really. At best, of course, it was a difference of 3 points for most managers, and that was really it, right? We had the Foden benching news, and also the knock-on impacts of that within his sort of early substitution versus Real Madrid, and what that will mean going forwards. But I think he'll probably be rested for the Luton match, and we'll see, of course. I mean, we'll probably get news, we'll probably get leaks as well, so do stay tuned for the deadline stream, where I will be sort of revealing, or at least just reacting at least to the leaks live as we have it. So for this week, we have unfortunately descended to the rank of 2011, and part of that, of course, is losing 8 points versus Muniz, arguably 3 versus Luis Diaz, but that happens from time to time, right? You just got to move on. Game week 33, though, what's nice here is that we have, once again, a full house of amazing home fixtures, and then Heung-min Son. So really, with this team, I'm quite proud of the fact that the team looks very good finally, after a couple of hits, after a couple of unfortunate transfers, really stemming from the injury to Senesi, who is now finally back playing for Bournemouth. But in defense this week, we'll have Flecken versus Sheffield United at home. Finally, a player here who can hopefully do well for me. Sheffield United have actually looked pretty decent as an attacking side as of late. They've actually accumulated pretty good expected goal involvement versus the last few teams that they faced. So, for example, versus Chelsea, getting very healthy numbers there. Even versus Liverpool, cracking some pretty good chances, considering, of course, the gulf in the two teams, considering the game was at Anfield. So Sheffield United obviously have been ticking along decently, but we still regard them as one of the worst attacking teams in the league. And I don't think, 2 games will really change our minds on that. This is a great game to play Fleck, in my opinion. And for me, Neto, I think if there's anything that I can give a little bit of credit to with the United team, is that at least they're able to, create turnovers, which actually allows them to score on the counter at times versus some of their opposing teams, and, create mistakes from their opponents. So That's something where, of course, Neto is going to be benched for this week, although I can understand a lot of people still wanting to play Zabarni. Ultimately, with some of the injuries that we have this week, with some of the issues, like, for example, the Aitnuri knock, which we'll get a development update on, hopefully from Gary O'Neill, or even, for example, people like myself owning Guardiola, I can understand a lot of people having to field, your fourth, fifth choice defender this week. For me, I'm estimating really that Guardiola is going to be fit, and simply it just comes down to the lack of availability of the City defense, rather, right? Stones apparently also suffered a little bit within the game. Pep Guardiola mentioned it. I think he's going to get rested, for example, versus Luton. Guardiola seemed fine. He came off the game fine. He played the full game. Walker still obviously struggling with his injury. I think it makes more sense to prioritize him once again for the Real Madrid match. And because of that, I think that there might just be a good chance that Guardiola will actually start this game. Although I think, with the whole City squad, we have to say that the priority, of course, is going to be with this Real Madrid match, which could really be the toughest match in their Champions League season. Now, of course, the semifinals are also looking to be extremely tough for, whether City or Real Madrid come out of their respective ties. But that's just something to sort of put context into why we might be a little bit more hesitant towards going for Man City picks this week and having comfort in the minutes that they're going to play. The rest of the team will just be Saliba and Gabriel. With Saliba and Gabriel, with this being a slightly tougher fixture, with them also being firmly within the title race and no one really being as good as this sort of core duo here, I just have to play them. Gusto as well, with the Chelsea defense looking pretty maligned. I have also decided to bench him, even though actually the news about his resting or his, for example, exclusion from the Sheffield United squad from last week actually just comes down to him being ill. So maybe, him playing poorly within the United game makes a lot more sense now, if he was ill. And hopefully we have Gusto for the rest of the season before James sort of mounts a comeback. As far as the midfield this week, we'll be fielding the full house if all goes well. Now, Saka limped off the game versus Bayern Munich. He also scored a brilliant goal. I'm hoping that I can sort of count on Saka here versus Aston Villa, even if it's slightly limited minutes, because I think now the Gulf in fixture is a little bit better than, for example, last week when I went for the punt with Muniz. Muniz is now away from home, Saka's at home, and you're facing an Aston Villa team, which are definitely worse on defense compared to Brighton. And then, of course, with Muniz, similar sort of level of opposing defense, but then, home and away being a pretty crucial factor there. So Saka for me starts this week. Son, still with, getting a chance to play versus Newcastle, in my opinion, which is a very poor defense still. I would love to have Son. I still think that he's a differential, and we never know. Yes, of course, a lot of people are tempted to move off of Son, but for me, as someone who is planning to basically play the rest of the season without any chips except for a bench boost on 37, Son is a transfer that I find is very hard to sort of execute. Particularly since I'll have to sort of go into a doubler in Gaming 34 if I move out of Son, and then also subsequently probably go back into him, which I don't really like. I've got a bit of value tied into Son. I've got no reason. I don't have a dead end in hand. So Son makes sense and he'll stay within the team. Palmer will also stay, just a great fixture again. He was rested once again versus Sheffield United early because it seems like he's been overloaded. He's been playing a lot of minutes of football. He's tired noticeably, and Pochettino just decided to give him that rest. Now, we've had a week of rest for Palmer, so I think this is going to be a good sort of occasion for him to play 90 minutes of football, so not really concerned with his minutes this week. With Luis Diaz and Salah, we had them off the bench within their Europa League game, and ultimately I think that they'll play. Them being rested, not being in the starting lineup in that game, for me is just a telltale sign to say that they're crucial for the league games, which definitely is going to be the priority for Liverpool, in contrast to, for example, City, who are probably prioritizing this Real Madrid game, just because it's also Luton, the way you have to look at it. So Luis Diaz and Salah, very confident about them this weekend, and also it kind of stems the debate about captaincy, which we'll move on very shortly into as well. As far as my forward line this week, very comfortably playing Solanke and Holland. I think a lot of people might be a little bit dismayed by Solanke just because last 2 weeks, of course, we've seen the Bournemouth offense look pretty stale, to be quite honest. The expected goals has sort of dropped off a little bit versus Everton. It wasn't exactly the best performance versus Crystal Palace. They just about scored 1 goal too. And Crystal Palace, however, of course, are a pretty good team. But the expected goals has been sort of around that range of, sub 1 or around 1.4, which is quite low considering all the home fixtures that Bournemouth has had. But once again, you've got a great home fixture here again for this Bournemouth team. And I'm pretty confident that United have been a pretty poor defense. So when you contrast that to Crystal Palace and Everton, the two teams that I mentioned where Bournemouth had roughly sort of accumulated a team expected goal amount of around 1.3, 1.44. it does make a lot more sense, and it does make me a little bit more comfortable knowing that Solanke's getting to face this sort of really depleted United team that have also looked really, really bad, on the road. And we could see that in the game versus Brentford very glaringly, where the forwards like Mbumo and Tony had plenty of chances just because, unfortunately, there's a lot of space to be sort of taken advantage of when you get to play versus United at this moment in time in transition, which obviously, creates a very chaotic game for both sides. But when you have an attacker here with Solanke, very comfortably playing him over Muniz in this situation. As far as Haaland, we are thinking, of course, of starting him, but the question is more about captaincy. And going back to the point here, I think Real Madrid is the priority game for Haaland. He did get a rest recently, though, but I just wouldn't be surprised that even if we get news on the deadline, for example, and a leak that Haaland's going to start versus Luton at home, that he'll get subbed off early. Now, a lot of people will probably give the usual argument, which is going to be, when Haaland when he starts, for example, and he gets subbed off early, it's very, very unlikely that he would have done nothing within the game for him to be subbed off, right? Usually he gets subbed off if he puts on a great performance, and Luton at home, that seems like the type of game, particularly if, let's say, Kevin De Bruyne is fit and ready to play in this fixture here, that you'd expect to have a great Haaland performance, and he can once again terrorize really this very depleted Luton team, who have been decent defensively as of late, but ultimately, last time round we saw them in the FA Cup, and that was only away from home. Haaland had his way with that Luton team, and I think very much so. We're not expecting 4 goals necessarily, but I think we could expect a great game from Haaland here as long as he starts. So the way I'm leaning really is more towards the camp where it is a 50-50, because with Salah, I think you have the guarantees, right? You have the resting in the European fixture. You know that he's probably going to play 90 minutes, given that he's had a week to rest here for the Crystal Palace game effectively. And with Haaland, of course, the priority is Real Madrid still. So for me, I think it's a bit of a 50-50. But given that a lot of managers have recently moved out of Haaland, and I don't think his ownership is particularly that high, I don't think there's any, for example, additional gains to be made necessarily from just captaining Salah over Haaland from a risk perspective. So I really do think that playing the fixture here is probably still quite logical, as long as we get the news that Haaland starts. Now, of course, I think what a lot of managers might be thinking about if let's say we find ourselves within the miraculous situation that Haaland is benched on game week 33. Obviously, we're just going to move into a Salah captaincy, but some people will also be asking the question of, what would I do as an FPL manager, knowing that maybe he's only going to play, 20 minutes at best versus a Luton team? And my response to that really is that it depends on a couple of things. So first of all, I think it depends on whether someone like Foden is going to start the fixture as well. Because if we think about someone like Foden, he's been essential to the City team as of late. He's obviously a lot cheaper than Haaland as an asset. And if I have the chance ever to move away from Haaland, this is my opportunity to jump onto Isak nice and early, right? Because Isak, of course, doesn't have a Game Week 34 fixture that's amazing. Yes, that's true. But there is a small opportunity here where, in my opinion, I can just go Haaland to Isak as a move. Haaland to Tony feels a little bit short term for me, because at the end of the day, I am preparing for a bench boost on 37. So because I only have 1 free transfer this week, and ultimately I need to spend my other free transfers in the future to make sure I have also a good Game Week 34 team, and so on and so forth. I think the nice thing in knowing that Haaland will probably start versus Brighton, but also knowing that that fixture isn't particularly good from a sort of offensive point of view, particularly knowing that City as well recently haven't been ticking along as well as, for example, a team like Arsenal have, or even a team like Liverpool have all season long. So I kind of like the idea of going Haaland to Isak, to be quite honest with you, and then making or saving that Everton sort of defensive transfer for Game Week 34, which was basically my plan all along, if you've been watching the transfer plans video. So that sort of roughly is the idea here. Now, we even have a crazy situation where what happens if, let's say, Guardiola's not ready to play, and we know potentially we could see Trent starting as well, which I think is very unlikely because he'll probably get some minutes versus Atalanta. I'm not sure if we'll get a guaranteed sort of confirmation that he'll start versus Palace. In that situation, I think maybe a crazy little hit for Trent and Isak will be interesting, and I can drop Haaland as well. But that's something that I'm sort of holding on to as being a little bit far-fetched. I don't see myself doing that. As I said, the most logical transfer for me right now is Haaland to Isak. Obviously, Tony is another player that I can consider, but I don't really like the transfer too much, if I'm honest, just because it feels a little bit short-term, and Isak is going to have a much more monumental double. He's also going to have the exact same fixture, which is Game Week 35 versus Sheffield United at home, and I probably won't be able to get to Isak if I make the Tony transfer on this week, because on Game Week 35, my priority will probably be for your Jacksons of the world, your Tottenham players, and even other Chelsea or Tottenham midfielders as well, if I kind of want to just decide how I want to go about maybe the sort of triple ups of your Chelseas and Tottenham. So that's something to think about right now. That's the context that we have in terms of any potential news and how I plan to react to sort of Luton reaction news. Foden, of course, is someone who a lot of people have been asking me questions about. And I think one of the interesting things about Foden is that he's been brilliant. But as you can see, of course, with some of the recent benchings, is that City, of course, are going to be involved in multiple competitions. And so the way I see Foden, for example, finding himself towards my team is definitely if let's say I go out of Haaland to Isak, I've got an opportunity, of course, to move very easily into Foden very shortly. But I also have the opportunity to just simply go into Foden from Saka, maybe around game week 37 or game week 36. Depending on, of course, if we get any news around that time, around benchings for Saka or benchings for Foden, things like that will ultimately sort of influence our decisions. And so on the bench boost in game 37, since Saka won't double there, it's either a transfer towards someone like a Fernandes, a Garnacho, or a Foden, just depending on sort of how much cash I have available and what moves I'm making then. But that's my sort of thoughts in terms of the team selection. Right now, of course, the captaincy is going to be locked on Haaland, expecting that he starts. But once again, of course, if we know that he doesn't start, very simple move towards Salah as the captaincy of the week. If you are someone who owns Tony as well, I do think it's interesting to think about differential captaining Tony, but only really if I think right now you're in a position of just wanting to chase rank, because I still think it's more logical to go with your Haaland or your Salah right now. And that's pretty much it for this week. So thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.